our hosts, Stephanie Sato and Vincent Brown. Before I do that, one quick little housekeeping note. You're probably seeing our timekeeper, Valerie's screen and the League of Women Voters information. And then you may have a little box up on the right-hand corner. If you click on the little box that is a full rectangle, not a flat line, but a full rectangle, you'll get the speaker view. So right now you may be stuck with me, for example. If you click on the edge of the corner of that box and click and drag it, you can make the box bigger. Where the League of Women Voters information is right now is where the time tracker thing, clock, the countdown clock, there we go, is going to be. So you're probably going to want to see the speaker in a bigger picture, so try that trick. If that made no sense to you, feel free to chat to us and we'll try to walk you through it. Or you could just disregard it. I should mention that this program is being recorded, so for your friends and relatives who miss this, we will have it up on our site in a couple of days. And with that, I believe we're starting, Stephanie, with you, is that right?
Yes, Taylor, we're going to go over some of the rules. Myself and Vince, we're very happy to be here. Thank you for asking us. 3 basic rules. The first one is we're going to start with a 1.5 minute opening statement from each candidate. And then we're going to get into the questions. And each candidate will have 1.5 minutes to answer each question, except for the quickie question at the very end where they're going to have 1 minute. And we're going to take turns about who answers each question first. After we're done with that, the candidates will have 1 minute to deliver closing statements. Vince?
So we'll be keeping track of time. You will see a countdown timer on your screen. The moderator will cut off the speaker once the time is up. So we have a list of questions culled from the Ginny questionnaire, questions asked at previous judicial election forums in this county and others, and some suggestions from ACBA board members. The questions have not been provided to the candidates in advance. The audience may submit questions using the chat function. We have the sole discretion whether to replace one or more of the provided questions with those submitted by the audience. So with those are your rules.
Okay, I think we're ready to start. So let's start with opening statements. Elena, can you start first? You've got a 1.5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this evening. You know, I've been a criminal defense attorney in private practice for 26 years, primarily in Alameda County. I've represented some of the most vulnerable in our community, ordinary people in their worst moments, and I make sure that their constitutional rights are protected. I've served as a judge pro tem, and I know how much it matters when a judge making the decisions about the most important things in people's lives understands their lived experience. I'm a contributing author in the CEB Criminal Practice and Procedure Manual, and I am also the first Latinx to run for judge in Alameda County. And if elected, I'll be the first Latina lesbian on the bench. I've been endorsed by a diverse coalition of community leaders, including the retiring incumbent, Judge Carol Brosnahan, along with 34 current and retired Alameda County judges and 4 judges from other counties. I've been endorsed by the Alameda County Public Defender Brendan Woods and Congressman Eric Swalwell, a former Alameda County prosecutor. And those endorsements are meaningful because they know my work, my integrity, my temperament, and my commitment to equal justice. My experience and depth of knowledge of the law and perspective are why I was the lead vote getter in the March primary and why I'm uniquely qualified for this moment. In this time where meaningful change seems like a possibility, albeit from tragic events, the perspective of a private defense attorney is ever more important to meet this moment. I look forward to the questions and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Elena. Mark?
Thank you. My name is Mark Sickes, and I'm running for Superior Court Judge as well. I believe that what I bring to this race is a true diversity of experience. I am the only candidate that has been in court every day, basically, for 25 years, handling both criminal and civil matters. I've prosecuted criminal cases. I've defended civil criminal cases. I've prosecuted civil cases both on the defense and plaintiff side, representing everything from individuals in civil rights cases or workers whose rights are being violated to small businesses that are falling victim to government overreach and interference in their ability to conduct their business. And so what I bring is a diverse array of 49 trials tried to verdict in state and federal courts, about half civil, about half criminal. I also have a diverse coalition of endorsers, including the Alameda and California Democratic Parties, the Asian Pacific American Democratic Caucus, the Alameda County Democratic Lawyers Association, elected mayors, city councilmen, and LGBTQ leaders throughout Alameda County, several labor unions, including the union that represents court employees. And I would also add that if I am elected, I would be only the second openly gay man to serve as an Alameda County judge in a county where we've got 72 judges. I look forward to discussing the issues with you all tonight, and thank everyone for coming and taking the time to listen to me.
Thank you, Mark. And now we're going to get into the question portion of this. And for each question, we've got 1.5 minutes per candidate. And we're going to start. This first one is, why do you want to be judge? And I'm going to start with Mark.
Yes, one of the things that I like most about my practice, particularly when I represent individuals or small businesses, is helping them navigate through a system which can seem very foreign and very unfair and very strange to them. And I have found over the course of my 25 years, both representing people in the civil and criminal context, that when they believed that they had a judge who was smart and hardworking, conscientious and thoughtful, and really took the time to consider their case and treat them with fairness and dignity, they were okay with the result, even if things didn't shake out the way that they originally hoped to when they came to court. But I can only represent a certain number of clients in any given day or any given year, and the same is true for the rest of my partners and colleagues at my firm. As a judge, you can effectuate and help people develop confidence and faith and belief in the system in a much greater scale, because instead of handling 1 or 2 cases in court on a given day, you hear sometimes dozens, if not hundreds. I have volunteered as a judge pro tem and know that some mornings I've heard 140 cases. And I feel that my way of giving back to a community that has blessed me for so many years is to contribute by making sure that everyone gets a fair shake in a courtroom, that they're treated with decency, courtesy, and respect, and that I do my best to decide the case based on the facts and the law as justice requires.
Thank you. I'll let Valerie set up the time. And Elena, same question to you.
Thanks for the question. I want to be a judge because I feel like it would be a great way to serve my community, given the experience and my experience in the county. I've been in Alameda County for 26 years. I've worked with the community in Alameda County for my entire career. And so I understand the people in Alameda County. I understand the issues in Alameda County, the issues to their barriers to justice and access to the court system. And I want to use my experience through both the legal knowledge that I have and my experience knowing the community, knowing the people in the community to serve. Because there are some things that I think we could do better. I think we could do better in the courts in making it more accessible to the people in Alameda County. And, you know, quite frankly, Alameda County is 23% Latinx, and there's only 13% of Latinx judges on the bench. And opening has opened up. I came in to run for this office because I also want to show other young Latinx law students and lawyers that when the traditional paths won't take you where you belong, you make your own path and you get yourself there. We belong here, we deserve to be here, and there's no reason why we can't be. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. This next question is for you, and then we'll follow up with Mark. So Alameda County has a broad range of racial, ethnic, LGBT, religious, and socioeconomic communities. What experience do you have that would give you sensitivity or expose you to the different viewpoints and experiences of groups different than yourself?
That's a great question. And I just tell you a real quick story. You know, I was in the Valley in court, and I step up to the podium, and the judge says, you know, ma'am, you can't be there with your son. You can't stand up there with your son. And the guy standing next to me was not my son. It was my client. He just happened to be Latino. And so it is as important that the community sees within its system of justice people of color, but also that the systems of our government have people of color in them. And what I have done in my entire career is I have represented people all over Alameda County. I have come to know my clients and their families because it's their families who hire me. So I get to know them. I know all of the different cultures in Alameda County, from Fremont to Livermore. And so I believe that my extensive experience in the county, working with all of the different cultures in the county and being of a different culture, being a Latina, being a lesbian, I understand what that otherness feels like, what it feels like to be othered and be on the other end of that. And so I know how to, and part of my work is to humanize the person who is in front of the court. I have done that my whole career, and because I understand the people in this county. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. Mark, the same question. Please let me know if you'd like me to repeat it.
Actually, Vincent, if you don't mind, I did want you to repeat it, please.
Sure, absolutely. So Alameda County has a broad range of racial, ethnic, LGBT, religious, and socioeconomic communities. What experience do you have that would give you sensitivity or expose you to the different viewpoints and experiences of groups different than yourself?
Yeah, that is a good question. First of all, I should say that I spent 9 years as a member of the board of my synagogue at Temple Beth Abraham in Oakland, and 3 years as its president. And living in today's world, not a day goes by where I don't turn on the news and read about, for example, the shooting at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I don't see a prominent athlete issue an anti-Semitic slur. And so I understand from my own life experience as the grandson of someone who fled the Holocaust and the Nazis, what it is to be treated differently. It happens to me every day. Early in my career, I'll tell a story as well. Someone called me a faggot in a courtroom, and no one in that courtroom reacted or had any feeling that that was inappropriate or an improper way to treat a lawyer in court. Throughout my career, I have fought for the voice of people who have to stand up to power. I've represented African-American businesses standing up to power, immigrants who've had swastikas painted on their property, women, people of Asian Pacific American descent, LGBTQ people who are victims of discrimination. So my lived experience is one of being treated differently, and I've devoted a significant part of my career to representing people who have been treated differently. And I think I'll bring that to bear in terms of always showing people in my courtroom the dignity and respect that they deserve.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, this next question is, who are your typical clients? So I'm going to start with Mark for this one.
Sure. My typical clients sort of vary over the ebbs and flows of time. But for example, for the past 7 or 8 months now, my typical clients have been people in workplace situations where they've been victimized by discrimination on the basis of either race, gender, sexual orientation, or age. And I deal with that in 2 different contexts. I often represent union workers right now in the context of people who are subject to unfair disciplinary procedures at work that can lead to some sort of discipline or termination. I also represent people who are taking that next phase and going into litigation. But for example, I represent a woman of Chinese American descent who was unlawfully fired by a law school that she worked for. I represent someone of LGBTQ, who is LGBTQ, who's been the victim of a series of retaliatory and unfair disciplinary investigations in her place of work because she dared disclose improper workplace misconduct. I represent a man who is being victimized at work because he blew the whistle on unlawful conduct, and because he's over the age of 60, they're trying to force him out because of age. But I will say over 20 years, my clients vary from time to time, but for the past several years, my focus has been really on protecting the rights of workers who are subject to unfair treatment in the workplace based on race, gender, sexual orientation, or being the victims of retaliation for blowing the whistle on illegal conduct.
Thank you, Mark. Same question to Elena. Elena, can you tell us who are your typical clients?
I have a typical client. I mean, they all share the same situation in that they are accused of crimes. But I represent people from, college students, kids, professionals, licensed professionals, software engineers. And what is unique about each one of them is they bring their own story, their own lived experience. We're all sort of born with the same with the same divine spirit, and for many of us, that gets shaped by our lived experience. And so, what happens is to be able to take that lived experience that someone has had, understand it, understand them, and to be able to convey that to the court, to be able to convey that to the district attorney so that they understand that they are not one in a clump of people on a calendar in a day. It's a unique person with a unique lived experience who got in front of the court for very specific reasons. And so my typical client is somebody who needs to be seen for who they are. And I try to do that every day when I go into court. Thank you.
Vince, are you going to go with the next question?
Apologies about that. Sorry, I hit mute. I was speaking. So Elena, this next question is for you. Superior Court judges can be assigned to a wide array of civil, criminal, family, and juvenile cases. What have you done, and what do you intend to do to get up to speed on areas of law you are less familiar with?
Thank you. Well, what I have been doing since we've been in this time of COVID is sitting through a whole bunch of MCLE, some of the forums that the ACBA puts on. And then also, for every area of the law, there are practice guides, and I will go through those. There are people who practice in that area, and I will talk to them. I've talked to a few folks in different areas of the law over the last couple of months to get kind of a sense of what's happening in the court right now. There are plenty of resources out there for one to get up to speed. And it is, knowing where they are, being willing to spend the time. The law is the law. There's evidence, there are codes of procedure, and that kind of goes across the board. But in those specific areas of the law, it is talking to people who do that, sitting in on courtrooms, and judges who have those areas, and then just getting down and learning the material.
Mark, I can repeat the question for you. So Superior Court judges can be assigned to a wide array of civil, criminal, family, and juvenile cases. What have you done, and what do you intend to do to get up to speed on areas of law you are less familiar with?
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have been blessed with a pretty diverse career. I have prosecuted criminal cases, I've defended civil cases, and I've had a very broad civil litigation practice for a number of years. And so I come to this with a wide variety of experience, both on the civil and criminal side. A lot of what I have done and what I would continue to do is what I do, for example, when I get a judge pro tem assignment. I'm a big fan of the CEB treatises. They offer really in-depth information about various areas of law, particularly the policy and the reasons behind why directions of law go the way they do. I've worked with some people, for example, recently who are pretty unhappy with the probate system, and particularly the appointments of conservators and guardians over elder people. And I've tried to hear what their concerns are and educate myself about the challenges with guardianships. And the same thing is true with other areas of law. I talk to a lot of my friends who practice in areas that I'm less familiar with, for example, juvenile dependency, family law, and to get a feel for what it is that they do and how they go about doing it. If elected, I would continue to use the resources that are available to judges, to read CEB treatises, to practice. But ultimately, I also do believe that having practiced every kind of law except for family law and probate law, that I also come with a breadth of experience to help me out.
Thank you.
Every person comes in with some biases. What are yours, and how do you intend to deal with them? And we'll start with Mark.
You know, I think that examining what our biases are is kind of a lifelong and a difficult process. And it's one that my clients experience. You know, I try to be free from explicit bias, and I try to believe that I view everyone with an equal footing. But I think that it's natural in some ways to have affinities for the people who are most like us. For example, most of my social circle are people I know from the LGBT community or from the Jewish community. And I think those natural affinities are there. A lot of my social friends are like me, are members of the PTA where our kids go to school at Oakland Tech. So I recognize that I have a natural affinity for people who have a shared life experience. I think the good news in what I would do and continue to do is that, again, I'm blessed with a career of representing people who have very different lived life experiences than I do. I represent a lot of people who are very vulnerable to people in positions of power, either because of race, gender, or ethnicity. And I think, you know, working with people who have a very different life experience than the one I have, and have heard about how discriminatory and unfair treatment affects them, that's something that has always been really impactful for me, along with my own instances of being victimized by bias. And so that's how I would try to improve.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll repeat the question for Elena as well.
Thank you.
Every person comes in with some biases. What are yours, and how do you intend to deal with them?
You know, yeah, you're absolutely right. Everyone does have bias, and it's important, and it is you know, daily and lifelong work to really try to recognize them, to see them, to notice them when they come up whenever you can, and to work on them, and to figure out, well, you know, I'm thinking this, and what does that mean, and where is that coming from? And how is that affecting the decision that I'm making? And my life experience, I've been really lucky that I have a wide range of friends, colleagues, people from all socioeconomic ranges, and people from all different diversities and cultures and ethnicities. That's how I've lived my life. That's how that is how I go out in the world. And so I appreciate, I so appreciate the diversity of the Bay Area, because you can have a very rich life with many people who don't look like you, who don't eat the food you eat, who don't, you know, have a family history, you know, in the same country that your family history was from. And that's a beautiful thing in this area. And it is that kind of exposure and that kind of experience that I think is a great way to get a sense of, check your biases on a regular basis.
Is there anything you hope to accomplish as a judge that you don't believe that you can accomplish currently in your capacity as an attorney? And if so, what? Elena, can you answer that for us, and then we'll move on to Mark?
Did you say me?
Yes, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know, I think what I have learned over these years of practicing is that over time, you know, I have seen that there are huge barriers to people accessing the justice system in Alameda County. The reconfiguration of the courts has really created hurdles for people who need to utilize a court system. Between the cost and the distance that people have to travel if they have to go to court, it is really burdensome. To the extent that I can have an effect on that, to try and work on committees to make it easier for people to access the justice system, I really want to do that, because sometimes people really need it. And it is almost impossible to access. I also want to expand on the alternatives to incarceration and conviction that Alameda already has, and has a robust program. And I would like to expand on that, because I've had so many clients who made mistakes when they were young and are suffering from those, that tag that they have, you know, in their 30s and in their 40s, when they're more mature, and they're still sort of living with the stigma of what they did when they were young. So I would like to the extent that I can, work on those areas and have some effect on those areas, so that people can take responsibility and then move on, and move on and be equal to other people in their community.
Thank you. Mark, the same question is for you. Is there anything you hope to accomplish as a judge that you don't believe that you can accomplish currently in your capacity as an attorney? And if so, what?
But thank you. First of all, one of the things that I've always loved about the practice of law is it really teaches you humility. Every time you think you've got something figured out and you know how to fix it, the law comes around and kind of teaches you that you don't necessarily know everything, or a jury does that, or a judge does that. You know, the night I was endorsed by the California and Alameda County Democratic parties, I got to stand in front of audience and talk about what I would like to change. It's basically one of the things I would like to work with my colleagues on is, again, also the realignment of the courts. I think that if you, by putting all of the unlawful detainer cases in Hayward, for example, it really creates a barrier to access, particularly for people who have limited access to transportation, or have difficulty finding childcare, such that travel becomes incredibly burdensome. That's something I've advocated since day one of the campaign, and that's why the Democratic Party endorsed me, I believe. I also would like to spend some time working with the community. I know there's a lot of concern about the probate courts and guardianships, how we're treating some of our most vulnerable people, the elderly, who because of mental capacity issues are being placed into conservatorships. And again, I can't comment a specific case or a specific judge, but I know that there's an outcry in the community where they're not feeling heard. And so I would very much want to work with my colleagues to make sure that the people of Alameda County feel that their concerns about the court system are heard by the judges in the court system.
Thank you.
Okay, our next question. Tell us about your experience, if you have any, working with unrepresented litigants in the legal profession. And Mark, we're going to start with you.
Well, I've had my share of cases where the person on the other side was unrepresented. I've had that happen both in my experience in criminal practice and in my experience in civil practice. I've had to litigate cases from the beginning through trial, sometimes against unrepresented people. But more importantly, although I'm a near lifelong resident of Alameda County, my practice takes me all over the state of California. And for example, I litigated a civil rights case in Lake County where I was in a courtroom that heard everything. And so I've seen, particularly in the area of family law and in the areas of criminal law, that's where I feel like I've seen the majority of people who are representing themselves. I think the experience litigating with and working with people who are unrepresented is challenging, because you have to afford someone who's representing themselves the same courtesy and dignity and respect that you would afford a lawyer or someone who's represented. And yet at the same time, as a judge, you also will have to apply the law fairly and equally, which means you can't give legal advice to someone that's representing themselves. So I think that that's a challenge in terms of what's required of a judge. But I've certainly worked on the opposite sides of, and had plenty of opportunities to observe people who are self-represented. And I think I understand the economic and social challenges that involves.
Thank you, Mark. And same question for Elena, which I'll repeat for you.
Thank you.
Tell us about your experience, if you have any, working with unrepresented litigants in the legal profession.
Thanks. You know, the experience that I've had of unrepresented litigants has been when I have part of criminal cases there's oftentimes a companion restraining order matter, or sometimes. And so there are many times that the other side is unrepresented when I represent my client in those matters. And so it is, you do see, and I do see some really good judges who will hear the unrepresented person and make sure that they are heard, that the process is explained to them as best as possible, so that they can do the best that they can, while not giving advice, but making sure that they understand what's going on. I also help sometimes people who are wanting to clear up their records, and I help walk them through the program and the process so that they can represent themselves, but they don't have to spend money to clean up their record at the end of their probationary period, or when that time is available. So a lot of working with unrepresented people, I think, is one, letting them be heard, because sometimes what I see a lot in court are some people represent themselves because they feel like they're just not being heard by their attorneys. And so they are frustrated, they are angry, they're scared. And so to recognize that in someone and be able to connect with them to help them understand what's going on, so that they can represent themselves as best as possible.
Thank you.
All right. So we're halfway through the questions now. We're going to move on to the 8th question. This question is going to be for you, Elena, and then we'll follow up with Mark. So the 6th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees criminal defendants an impartial jury, and the Supreme Court has held that an essential component of this guarantee is a selection of a jury from a representative cross-section of the community. As you are aware, Alameda County is a very diverse county. Do you have any thoughts on cases where convictions are handed down by juries that are not reflective of the peers of a criminal defendant?
If I understand your question correctly, do I have a thought about those cases?
That's correct.
Well, I think that that it is hugely important that a defendant has a jury of their peers. And I have seen in some trials that I've had where, we have a person of color who is sitting in front of a jury, and that jury pool is coming from Pleasanton and Livermore, in Castro Valley, and it is not a jury of their peers. And, that is the thing, when someone is coming from, for example, if you have an Oakland defendant and they're, in dense urban areas, you tend to have more people of color. And to have a jury pool from the area from which they live will give them the community that they live in. And similarly, if you have someone from Livermore who has a very different experience, there's an understanding and a sense of, oh, this is somebody from my community. When the jury comes from the community and they care about what's happening, they care about the people in the community. And so it's important for a person to have a jury of people who are from within their community, who have that same sort of lived experience as a defendant.
Thank you, Elena. So I'll repeat the question for you, Mark.
Thank you.
So the 6th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution guarantees criminal defendants an impartial jury, and the Supreme Court has held that an essential component of this guarantee is a selection of a jury from a representative cross-section of the community. As you are aware, Alameda County is a very diverse county. Do you have any thoughts on cases where convictions are handed down by juries that are not reflective of the peers of a criminal defendant?
Yeah, I don't have a specific example of a case that I could point to or comment on. But I think the key in what you were saying is, and in terms of the constitutional guarantee, is the idea of a representative cross-section of the community. And so I think it's important for our juries to be as absolutely diverse as possible. I think we have to have people of color on our juries. I think we have to have people of different ethnic, religious backgrounds on our juries, because that's what makes the system work. I actually really believe in the collective wisdom of putting 12 jurors in a box. And generally, I have found more often than not that collectively those 12 jurors come to the right result. Have I seen instances where racial bias has played an issue and the jury has not been fair? Of course. Have I seen situations in jury veneers where I see bias? Yes, I did a trial in Alameda County a couple of months ago representing a Vietnamese man, and some of the bias among the jurors was palpable. But at the end of the day, the good news is we have a system that allows us to challenge jurors for cause. The courts have expanded the people that are protected and should remain on juries. We can no longer kick people off because of race, because of gender. Sexual orientation has now been added. And so while the system isn't perfect, I think we've made tremendous strides, particularly in Alameda County, of doing our best to assure diverse cross sections of jurors actually sit on our jury panel.
Thank you. So I have a follow-up to this question. Alina, we'll start with you. What do you think about the court's proposal to go to countywide jury pools so that residents of Pleasanton could be asked to serve in Oakland and vice versa?
What do I think about it?
Right. Yeah.
Well, you know, as I said before, I mean, I really think that a jury of your peers, and that's for misdemeanors is the change, right? Isn't that the proposed change? I think it's already countywide for felonies. But particularly with misdemeanors, when you have somebody coming into the court, to have, you know, this sort of collective sense of what the community is, who they are, I think is really important for misdemeanors. And, you know, and that comes up in cases, you know, prostitution cases, low-level offenses, and whether or not the community wants to see those sorts of cases being prosecuted. And so I think it's important that, particularly for misdemeanors, that the jury stay within the jurisdictions of those smaller communities. I understand the change was initially made because of the pandemic and the issues with the pandemic, but I really think that the community sense of their justice system, I think, should stay within the community.
Great. Mark, the same question to you. What are your thoughts about the court's proposal to go to countywide jury pools so that the residents of Pleasanton could be asked to serve in Oakland and vice versa?
Yeah, well, I would like to start out by saying that I do understand some of the concerns, but I think that the issue is pretty nuanced. For example, the assumption, implicit in some of these concerns is that there are no people of color that live in Pleasanton. I know that to be not true. I mean, I have friends who are people of color who live in Pleasanton. I have several clients who are of Asian Pacific American descent that live in Dublin. So the county has a lot of ethnic diversity and racial diversity in it already. Having said that, I do understand, particularly with misdemeanors as well, that for the system to work, I think people have to feel that it's fair. In other words, you need a collective buy-in that the system is doing its best to give people a fair jury that represents the community. And I do see a distinction between populations that we see in urban areas and more rural areas in terms of life experience. And I wouldn't limit it to ethnicity because I think it's more broadly lived experiences. So at the end of the day, though, you know, I don't know what the best answer is because I've tried a number of cases in Alameda County representing ethnic minorities where I felt that the entire county, drawing from the entire county led to a fair result. But criminal law and criminal consequences are different. Misdemeanors are different. And I do understand the opposition to drawing countywide in misdemeanor cases pretty well.
Thank you.
Okay, this next question, and Mark, I'm going to have you start.
Sure.
Is what would you do in an instance where it was very apparent to you that an attorney was seeking to strike a potential juror on inappropriate grounds?
Well, I think that a judge ultimately, you know, there's this euphemism that the judge is the 13th juror, right? And so at the end of the day, while I believe a judge should let people try their cases, there is a higher obligation to make sure that the process and the system is fair. And normally those issues are resolved by way of a party bringing a motion claiming that there is bias in terms of how jurors are being removed under peremptory challenges. But if I actually had a real concern that an unconstitutional conduct was happening in terms of kicking off jurors or exercising peremptory challenges of jurors based on race or sexual orientation or gender or any protected class for that matter, I would think it's my obligation to step in and discuss that with the lawyers initially in chambers. And the courts do have authority on their own to invite briefing on issues that are of concern to them. And being a civil practitioner primarily now, I'm a big fan of briefing and making sure really that the law is fleshed out. But if I felt that one party or another was acting in a way to deprive someone of a fair jury in violation of constitutional norms, I would absolutely take it on myself to inquire into that and to explore that to make sure that the trial is indeed fair. I do a lot of appeal work as well, and no one wants a case to come back on appeal because the jury wasn't a proper jury.
Thank you, Mark. And Elena, same question to you. What would you do in an instance where it was very apparent to you that an attorney was seeking to strike a potential juror on inappropriate grounds?
Here's how I see that question. I don't know what the attorneys are thinking, right? I would not know that. I wouldn't know that the other side isn't objecting for a reason, and that's why they remain silent. Maybe they know something I don't. There is a process, and the processes are in place for each attorney to represent their respective sides. And if there is, if there is clearly something that is that runs afoul of the law, certainly a judge should step in. But a judge should not be second guessing what the attorneys are doing for their clients. There are processes in place if they get it wrong. If an attorney didn't object, there's a process in place if that had some effect. So I don't know that a judge should be backseat driving what the lawyers are doing. I don't think that that's the appropriate role of the judge. But because you don't know what they're thinking, they have their client. You assume that they have their client's best interests at heart, and they're acting appropriately. Without seeing the situation, without really understanding and seeing what was happening, I would say you leave it to the lawyers to litigate and deal with it if there's an issue later.
Thank you, Elena.
Okay. Coming to the next question. Elena will allow you to answer this question first, and then we'll move on to Mark. So if you observe a party in your courtroom being poorly represented by an unprepared or ineffective lawyer, how would you handle the situation?
Thank you for that question. I think that, again, it's not the judge's job to backseat drive what the lawyers are doing. If there is a situation in court where someone clearly sort of lacks the competence to be there, then there are processes for that. One of the things you can do is, put a case over, raise the issue with both sides, talk to, the state bar. But again, it is, if there is clear misconduct going on, yes, a judge should act. But a judge should not assume that they know what has gone on with the other lawyers, with the lawyers before them. Clearly, misconduct, not showing up to court, not being honest, never being prepared, those sorts of things. Yeah, a judge has abilities to sanction and to do things like that. But I think a judge should be very careful about interfering with the attorney-client relationship.
Thank you. Mark, the same question for you. If you observe a party in your courtroom being poorly represented by an unprepared or ineffective lawyer, how would you handle the situation?
Sure. Well, first of all, I would say, having tried as many cases to verdict as I have and being in court as often as I am, I truly respect and appreciate a judge that allows the lawyer to try his, her, or their case. I don't think that the judge is in the best position to know necessarily what's in the best interest for the client, or to dictate what constitutes representation of a sufficient quality such that they should be intervening. Having said that, there are times where the failure to intervene can be quite disastrous. I mean, to have a case come back on appeal is costly, it's burdensome, it's really difficult. I can give by way of an example, a case I tried last November in Alameda County, where the opposing attorney had called the client's prior lawyer to the witness stand. And there was a real concern about whether or not that was going to effectuate a waiver of the attorney-client privilege, which would have devastating consequences to that client to have the privilege be waived. And so what the judge did was, in a really respectful and polite way, called the Chambers conference, advised that there was an issue here, and asked counsel whether he was sure whether or not he wanted to reconsider calling a former lawyer given the risks. And I thought that was appropriate because it avoided a catastrophe without the judge trying the lawyer's case for the lawyer.
Thank you.
This next question, Mark, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
Can you tell me what characteristics about the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg or any other Supreme Court justice do you most want to emulate, and why?
Wow. I don't know if there's one characteristic. There's a story about Justice Ginsburg, though, that I'm very fond of, which is, many people know, the first Monday of October is when the Supreme Court opens its sessions. And it often can be the case that the first Monday of October falls on Yom Kippur, which is the holiest of Jewish holidays. And so one year when that happened, Justice Ginsburg went to Justice Rehnquist and asked if they could postpone it. Justice Rehnquist was unpersuaded and said, well, what about Good Friday? We have our conferences on Fridays. What should we do about that? Justice Ginsburg said, well, we can move that too. And he was unpersuaded. So Justice Ginsburg came back and said, well, let's look at it this way. If the opportunity to argue before the Supreme Court is an opportunity that many lawyers will get only once in a lifetime, if at all, and would we ever want to be in the position of forcing a lawyer to choose between the greatest career moment of their life and their faith? And she said, I think not. And that persuaded Justice Rehnquist to delay the first Monday in October openings when they fall on Yom Kippur. And so that to me represented someone who was so thoughtful in trying to balance legal obligations, the responsibilities of a judge, and yet being respectful of the diversity we have in terms of faith and religious practices. And that's something I so admire, that story. And that's something I hope to emulate if I'm a judge.
Thank you, Mark. And Elena, same question for you. What characteristics about the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg or any other Supreme Court justice do you most want to emulate, and why?
Two things about her. The first is her undying commitment to equal treatment, particularly for women under the law. And equal treatment for women, equal treatment for people of color, and to never, ever waver from that. And her work ethic. I mean, you know, one of the hardest working women on the planet. But what she did was she was able to see where how biases affect women, how biases that affect women affect men, and how our society is better when everyone is treated equal, because there are detrimental effects when you take away the rights or you diminish the rights of one class of people. It does affect everyone, and it affects another class of people. And so her undying commitment and to equal justice and equal rights for everyone, and particularly women.
Thank you.
Okay, we're coming on to our next question now. Elena, will start with you and allow Mark to answer after you. So the courts often hear cases where punitive measures such as jail time may neither be the best nor appropriate means of assuring justice. What are your thoughts on drug court and other progressive programs for criminal defendants with substance abuse and mental health issues? Do you have any goals or programs in mind to help these types of persons turn their lives around?
Oh, thank you. You know, one of the things when I started practicing that I learned was my office is in Berkeley. I started in Berkeley. Judge Brosnahan sat in the court in Berkeley. And as a young lawyer, seeing her and the compassion that she had for all of those kids who came off of Telegraph and were in her courtroom, all of the people who had substance abuse problems and particularly mental health problems, she knew them, she knew their families. She understood that what they needed was treatment rather than incarceration. She knew that if somebody is not competent with a misdemeanor, they're not getting treatment, they're just hanging out in the jail, decompensating day after day. And so what I would like to do is expand on those programs to bring in more people from the community, more programs from the community for particularly young offenders, for mental health treatment, for job training. One of the great things about this campaign that I have learned is about all the apprenticeship options that are available through the unions. And I think that the courts can work together with the community to create programs as part of the diversion programs, part of the deferred entry of judgment programs, to kind of get young people on track and to get people with mental health issues the treatment that they need.
Thank you. Mark, the same question for you. The courts often hear,
I'm sorry.
that's okay. So the courts often hear cases where punitive measures such as jail time may neither be the best nor appropriate means of assuring justice. What are your thoughts on drug court and other progressive programs for criminal defendants with substance abuse and mental health issues? Do you have any goals or programs in mind to help these types of persons turn their lives around?
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate the question because, you know, I grew up in a household where someone suffered from addiction. And you see how addiction can take over someone's life and put them in a position where they make choices that other people might not make. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that person has a criminal disposition or a disposition to do wrong. It's just that addiction can be overpowering, as can mental health. And so I certainly applaud the work that we've seen in the mental health courts and in the drug courts. For the 2 years or so that I represented people in the CAP program on conflict cases, I had a lot of clients that were in the drug court. And I so loved a system where the judge would get off the bench and show a young man, for example, how to tie a tie and how to shake hands and look at someone in the eyes when you have a job interview. Because I think we as a society have grown to recognize that punitive solutions don't always work, particularly when they're not designed to address the problems. And that when you give someone who's young and suffering, for example, from substance abuse problems, an opportunity to tackle the substance abuse problems and work to give that person the skills to stay out of the criminal justice system, you lower recidivism rates. And so I applaud those efforts and would want to work with my colleagues to expand them. I think that they're very hopeful and very positive.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay, Mark, for this next question, I'm going to start with you.
Sure.
Tell us about a mistake you made in your legal career and how you handled it.
Well, I'm sure I've made I've made plenty. I'm just trying to think of one where I won't violate attorney-client privilege. You know, I'll tell you one that I can think of that's sort of more easily able to address. I tried a very highly contested and high-profile whistleblower retaliation case in San Francisco, and I was my team was up against John Kecker, who was legendary, and it was a really hard-fought case. And tempers sometimes rose more than they should have. And Mr. Kecker and I, at the end of one courtroom day, entered into a colloquy, which probably would have best not been had at all, but certainly not in front of a judge and certainly not in front of the jury. And the next morning, the judge in the case called us into chambers and basically said, look, what you both did was not helpful. It didn't advance the process, and it's really not what you should be doing as worthy advocates. And, you know, I took that opportunity to think about it and to think, A, the judge was right. And without commenting on Mr. Kecker's behavior, I could comment on my own and realize that I had reacted in anger and in temper in a way that I should not have. And so what I did is I apologized to the court. I extended my hand out to Mr. Kecker and I apologized to him. And I told both the court and counsel that I would do my best never to repeat that mistake, because I thought that the criticism was fair and appropriate, that I made a mistake and that I wanted to learn from it.
Thank you, Mark. Same question to Elena. Please tell us about a mistake you made in your legal career and how you handled it.
Mistake I made. One mistake I made, I will say, is, you know, I had a case where a young woman was being abused by her boyfriend, and they were both charged together. And, you know, in that case, she wanted to meet with, her boyfriend was still sort of controlling the situation. And they wanted to meet together. And I didn't want to do that, not really realizing how much control he still had. But I, you know, and in hindsight, and so what happened was then he then took her to go see another lawyer. Ultimately, she came back to me after some time. But I think that in not being able to sort of see the situation for what it was, and to be able to understand what was going on, to help her so that I could represent her the best I could. I think in hindsight, I would do that differently now.
Thank you, Elena.
All right. So we have an additional question for you all. Elena, we'll start with you. So what distinguishes you from your opponent for this seat? If you could, say something nice about the other candidate as well.
What distinguishes me from Mark is that I have been working in the county, and I've been working in the courts in Alameda County. I know the Alameda County community, and I recognize that Mark has done a lot of different areas of the law over his career. He spent a few years in each area. It's great to have that sort of diversity of experience. But what I have is a long-term commitment and experience with the people in Alameda County, with the courts in Alameda County. And also, I have, and I believe the reason why I've been endorsed by 34 judges in Alameda County and by the retiring incumbent Judge Brosnahan, because I have what I think is important for a judge, and that is to have a temperament and integrity, and have a depth of knowledge of the law, and to be able to apply it, and to work alone. I've worked alone my entire career. So I am the last stop. I'm in the front line, and I'm the last stop in every case I have, and that's what a judge does every day, and that's what I've done every day of my 26 years. I haven't worked in a firm. I don't have a bunch of lawyers around me. I do the work, I make the decisions, and I take responsibility for those decisions. And that's what a judge does every day, and that's what I have done every day.
Perfect, thank you. The same question for Mark. What distinguishes you from your opponent for this seat? Can you say something nice about the other candidate as well?
Sure. Well, I'll start with saying something nice about the other candidate. It's hard to believe that Elena and I have been at this for almost 11 months now. And although we've never met personally before this race, it is clear to me that she has a true and abiding interest and commitment to her clients. That is something that comes through loud and clear. It's something I truly admire and I truly respect. And so I'm happy to tell her how obvious it is to me that she believes in what she does and who she represents. As far as what distinguishes us, I'd say that the things that distinguish us primarily is that I'm a lifelong resident of the Bay Area. My father and his family are lifelong residents of Alameda County. I've been in Alameda County since I attended UC Berkeley to go to college. While not every one of my cases is in Alameda County, I've done a significant amount of legal work in the county, but more importantly, I've done a significant amount of civic work in the county. I have worked through my synagogue to help people at the Alameda County Food Bank, to help provide clothing for the unhoused. And I've developed deep relationships and commitments in this county over the years. I've been on the PTA of my kids' school. I now volunteer to teach moot court at Oakland Tech, where my kids are sophomores. And I think in addition to the diversity of my experience, the fact that I've lived most of my adult life personally and professionally in Alameda County is something that is distinguishable.
Great. Thank you, Mark. So we have a question from the audience. So the election, and Mark, we'll start with you. The election of judges is so far down the ballot that it is unlikely most voters are truly informed. Would you favor some other form of appointment?
Well, there is another form of an appointment, and what I've kind of learned over the years is that either process is political, and I think we've all seen tremendous candidates who have sought appointment through the governor's office who have been looked over for one reason or another. So I'm actually a fan of this system the way it exists. I think that depending on when a judge retires, the governor has an opportunity to appoint people. That's a very thorough and rigorous vetting process. I don't fault the process in and of itself, although I do believe it is in part driven by connections that one has, and it has a political dimension on its own. And although it's down ballot, I think there were more than 300,000 votes cast in the last election. And I deal with every day with voters who are educating themselves about this race. So at the end of the day, I would say no, I don't favor another system of appointment. I like the system the way we have it, where the governor gets to appoint some of the judges. They are up for retention. And so if there's a problem with them, they are responsible to the electorate. But then at other times where a judge chooses to retire at their end of their term without seeking another 6 years, then the voters get to decide. I think this is democracy in action, for better or worse, for good or bad. And I'm a fan of the system. And so again, no, I would not change it.
Thank you, Mark. Elena, direct the same question to you from the audience. So the election of judges is so far down the ballot that it is unlikely most voters are truly informed. Would you favor some other form of appointment?
You know, I don't. I agree with Mark about this. I believe that that is the traditional paths of appointment. A lot of people are left out, particularly lawyers of color. And so there is this other option. And sure, we are down at the bottom of the ballot. And everyone I talk to through this process, I tell them, you know, just it's an endurance sport. Just keep going until you get to the judicial race. And so it's important that people know who serves their community. It's important that people know that they have a voice in who serves their community, and they have their vote means something. And so I hear a lot of people complaining about one thing or another about the system. And I always remind them that this is your chance. This is your opportunity to have some say in who serves you. These are taxpayer dollars that are paying for the court system, paying for the court, paying the salaries. And so for people to have some input and to know that they have some agency in who serves them, I think is a really empowering thing to explain to people. And that's been one of the goals of my candidacy, is to let people know, one, how important this office is, and two, how much agency they have in shaping it.
Thank you.
Okay, we've gone through all the questions that we had, as well as the questions from the audience. I want to thank you both for being very respectful to each other and of the time. We didn't have a lot of interruptions. We didn't have any distracting flies. I think it's gone very well. And we're going to move it down to the closing statements part of the program. And Elena, I had you start with the opening. So Mark, I'm going to have you start with the closing. So you've got 1 minute for your closing statement.
Thank you again for inviting me and for giving us the opportunity to do this in a nice reasoned debate format. I really do appreciate that. Look, at the end of the day, I believe that judges should be up for election from time to time, because it is true that sometimes if someone won't give you a seat at the table, you have to take it yourself. We live in a county that has only one openly gay man serving as a judge. And the appointment process hasn't yielded a different result. And so I believe that the voters should be engaged in this decision. I hope voters will vote for me because of the tremendous diversity of the experience that I bring to the bench, as well as a diverse life experience. To that end, again, I'm endorsed by a diverse array of elected leaders throughout the county. And most importantly, I've won the support of a lot of the labor unions that have direct involvement with the courts themselves. I hope everyone does their homework, reads up on us, studies up on us, and casts their votes. But thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark. Elena, your closing statement?
Well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. This was really nice. You know, what I want to say is, I hope that when you look at everything out there about the race, and if you would go to my website at elenacondisforjudge.com to start your research, you know, what I hope you see is that I have had, you know, a quarter of a century of commitment to Alameda County, working in the county. And because of that, you know, I am honored to be endorsed by Judge Brosnahan. I've also been endorsed by the retired Justice Maria Rivera from the First District Court of Appeal, civil rights attorney Ava Patterson and Walter Riley, the Asian American Bar Association, the Bay Area Lawyers of Individual Freedom, the East Bay La Raza Lawyers Association, the Alameda County Commissioners, Sundin and Palayo Yamas, Elizabeth Semmel and Jonathan Simon, and Jeffrey Stelvin from UC Berkeley School of Law, among many others, line DAs who are in the county, who know me and know my work. So thank you for your time. Hope you vote for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Elena. Tila, we're going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thanks to both of the candidates, and thank you to Stephanie and to Vince for carrying us so ably through this. Especially thank you to Valerie Lasqua, our able timekeeper, and again, many thanks to the League of Women Voters for their continued partnership over the years. We're delighted you could join us. We hope you'll check out some others of our events. If you're not already an ACBA member, you should know that all of our MCLEs and our socials are free. Come check them out. Our schedule is chock full, and we'd love to see you. A recording of this program and the pros and cons program will be posted on our website, so feel free to come and look at those as well. Thanks everybody for your time. We really appreciate it. We're happy to have you. Be safe.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you. And I love the timer.
Right?